There is a 14-story luxury hotel standing in a small Texas town that never needed a building over 2 stories. It has 450 guest rooms, 2 ballrooms, a bowling alley, and an Olympic-sized swimming pool once filled with mineral water. It has been empty since 1972. The shoe shine stand is still in the lobby. The wooden phone booths still line the wall. The man who ran it died of a heart attack inside one of its suites. This building was not built for oil, cattle, or cotton. It was built because people believed water could cure madness. The Baker Hotel rises 180 feet over Mineral Wells, Texas, a city of about 15,000 people sitting 51 miles west of Fort Worth. You can spot it from 10 miles out, this enormous Spanish colonial revival tower erupting above a downtown where almost nothing else clears 2 stories. When it opened in 1929, people called it the first skyscraper ever built outside a metropolitan city in Texas. It was designed to seat 2,500 for conventions and events. The town's population at the time was roughly 6,000. The building's event capacity was nearly half the number of people who actually lived there. Inside, an advanced hydraulic system piped ice water to every one of those 450 guest rooms. The lights and fans in each room switched on automatically when you unlocked the door and off when you left. Technology most big city hotels had not yet adopted. A private valet system allowed guests to deposit soiled laundry into a wall compartment that hotel staff could access from the hallway without ever entering the room. The entire second floor was given over to mineral baths, steam rooms, massage tables, and ultraviolet light therapy. Private elevators carried guests between their rooms and the bath level in robes and slippers. At the top of the building sat the Cloud Room, a glass-enclosed rooftop ballroom opening onto a garden terrace with a view across the Palo Pinto Hills that has not changed in nearly a century. All of it, the concrete, the engineering, the impossible luxury, was built on top of an aquifer in a valley surrounded by low Texas hills for one purpose: selling water that people believed could heal them. The water is still under the ground. The building is still standing. The Cloud Room has been empty for more than 50 years. The story of that water starts on Christmas Eve, 1877, when a man named James Alvis Lynch arrived in Palo Pinto County with his wife Armanda, their 9 children, and 50 head of livestock. The Lynch family had left Denison, Texas, about 80 miles northeast, heading west in search of a drier climate that might relieve their malaria. Both James and Armanda also suffered from rheumatism. When news reached them of Comanche attacks farther along the trail, they stopped in a valley near the Brazos River and decided to settle. The nearest fresh water source was 4 miles away, so Lynch dug a well on his property. What came up was foul-tasting water with a harsh mineral bite. They tried it on the cattle first. No harm. So the Lynches started drinking it, and within months, both James and Armanda noticed their rheumatism getting better. The water was terrible, but it seemed to work. Lynch laid out a town in 1881, named himself its first mayor, and started promoting his valley. A newspaper editor named J.C. Sun, who had founded the Palo Pinto Star, wrote articles praising the water's healing properties. His compensation was not cash. It was one of Lynch's town lots. Favorable journalism in exchange for real estate. Possibly the first public relations deal in Mineral Wells history. Then, around 1885, a man called Uncle Billy Wiggins drilled another well on a separate part of the property. This well would become the most famous in town, and its name came from cruelty dressed up as folk legend. According to accounts recorded in the 1935 book Geology of Palo Pinto County, a local physician named Dr. C.F. Yeager had a patient suffering from mental disorders who would sit near the well each day and drink the water. Local children began calling her the Crazy Woman, and her well became the Crazy Woman's Well, eventually shortened to the Crazy Well. The woman's name was never recorded. She reportedly improved and disappeared entirely from the historical record. unnamed, uncredited, permanently attached to a brand she never chose. Within a year of the crazy well being dug, over 3,000 people were camping on Lynch's property, paying 5 cents a glass. Mineral wells had become a destination, not because of clinical evidence, but because the water tasted bad enough to feel medicinal, and people who hurt were willing to believe anything. By the early 1900s, the belief had hardened into an economy. Visitors to mineral wells numbered 150,000 per year in a town of barely 8,000 permanent residents. For every person who lived there, nearly 20 visitors passed through each year, all drinking, bathing, and soaking in mineral-laden groundwater. Bathhouses, drinking pavilions, sanitariums, boarding houses, and hotels crowded the valley. By 1920, there were 400 operating mineral wells, 4 bathhouses, 7 public pavilions, 2 sanitariums, and 46 hotels and boarding houses. 21 separate mineral water companies competed for customers. The Weatherford, Mineral Wells, and Northwestern Railway connected the town to the wider market, and it moved in both directions. Tourists came in by train, and bottled mineral water went out by the carload. Mineral Wells branded itself the South's greatest health resort. The town was selling its own groundwater to the rest of the country, and the rest of the country was buying. That scale changed the rhythm of ordinary life. A train arriving with health seekers did not simply fill a hotel. It fed porters, bath attendants, bottlers, physicians, laundries, restaurants, and drivers waiting at the depot. A visitor might spend the morning moving between numbered wells, the afternoon wrapped in towels at a bathhouse, and the evening listening to music beneath a hotel roof. The 400 wells were not one uniform medicine cabinet. Each had a name, a proprietor, a mineral profile, and a sales argument. One might be promoted for the stomach, another for the nerves, another for the liver. The uglier the taste, the easier it was to believe something powerful was happening. Meanwhile, cases of bottled water and boxes of crystals left town, carrying mineral wells onto pharmacy shelves far beyond Texas. The railway made the valley accessible, but it also allowed the town to export the experience without the town. That contradiction would matter later. At the peak, however, no one had reason to fear it. The sidewalks were crowded with people who had come because conventional doctors had failed them, and every glass sold for a few cents turned private desperation into local payroll. Among the thousands who came to drink was a man named Edward P. Dismuke. Born in 1860, he arrived around 1900 carrying a doctor's prognosis that amounted to 2 words: no hope. His stomach disease was considered untreatable. Dismuke drank from the crazy well anyway. His stomach improved. Whether the water genuinely healed him is a question no one can answer, but Dismuke became its most devoted convert. In 1904, he founded the famous Mineral Water Company and started selling the water and an ambitious product line: Prontolax, Residuum, Dismuke's famous crystals, Dismuke's eye bath, from a drinking pavilion on Northwest 6th Street. With local banker Cicero Smith, he also built a recreational lake west of town and ran a scenic railway, gasoline-powered dinky cars shuttling visitors quarter-hourly between Lake Pinto and downtown from 1905 to 1909. He was not just selling water. He was building a resort ecosystem around a well that a mentally ill woman had made famous by accident. Ed Dismuke would live to 97 years old. He died of old age, the one ailment crazy water could not address. His company still operates from the same address, still sells the same water, and still has a large concrete replica of its original product bottle standing out front. The first Crazy Hotel was built in 1912, directly over the original Crazy Well, then enlarged in 1914 into a 4-story structure with 110 rooms, the town's first proper luxury hotel. It made money immediately because the well in the basement was the one that had the name. In March 1925, a fire destroyed it. Not just the hotel. The entire city block burned to the ground. The ruins were still smoking when 2 brothers from Dallas saw their opportunity. Carr P. Collins was a Dallas insurance magnate and a devoted crazy water drinker. With his brother Hal, he bought the smoldering lot and commissioned Dallas architects Lang and Witchell, designers of the Harris County Courthouse and Dallas High School, to rebuild. 2 years later, in 1927, the new Crazy Water Hotel opened. 7 stories, over 250 rooms, Spanish colonial revival design, a ground-floor drinking pavilion, physicians' offices on the mezzanine, and a rooftop ballroom with patio views across the Palo Pinto Hills. The cost was $1 million. The Crazy Hotel had died in fire and come back bigger. Hal Collins, managing the rebuilt hotel, created something that would outpace the water itself. Beginning around 1933, a live radio program called The Crazy Radio Gang broadcast from the hotel lobby, first over the Texas Quality Network, then on the NBC National Network, running until approximately 1940. The show mixed hillbilly and country music with sales pitches for Crazy Water Crystals, a white mineral residue produced by boiling down the well water at a factory built in 1919, packaged in distinctive green boxes and distributed through drugstores across the country. Dissolve a teaspoon in a glass of tap water at home, and you had the healing powers of mineral wells without the train ride. Orders filled many railroad carloads of crystals per week. Demand was so enormous that it exceeded the crystallizing plant's capacity. The company searched for a second water source, but it did not match the original patented composition. The product that was supposed to bring crazy water to every kitchen in America was undermined by its own popularity. But here is where the story turns competitive and personal. When the people of Mineral Wells realized that 2 Dallas outsiders were controlling the most profitable enterprise in town, the resentment was immediate. The Collins brothers did not live in Mineral Wells. The money flowing through the Crazy Water Hotel was flowing back to Dallas. A group of local business leaders decided they had endured enough. They pooled $150,000 and devised a plan to build a rival hotel so large, so luxurious, and so technologically advanced that it would humiliate the crazy in every dimension. They contacted Theodore Brasher Baker, a Texas hotel magnate who had built the Baker Hotel in Dallas and the Hotel Texas in Fort Worth. Baker was intrigued. He hired architect Wyatt C. Hedrick, a Fort Worth man who was an engineer by education and called himself an architect before Texas required a license. Hedrick modeled the design on the Arlington Hotel in Hot Springs, Arkansas, another famous mineral water resort. Because Mineral Wells had no workers skilled in structural steel erection, Hedrick chose poured-in-place reinforced concrete. It was a practical decision forced by the local labor pool. It was also the reason the building would survive more than half a century of total abandonment without collapsing. Construction began in 1926. The result would rise 14 stories over a downtown that had never imagined anything above 4. The building site itself became an advertisement before the hotel could sell a single room. Floor after floor of concrete climbed over streets lined with much smaller brick storefronts. The tower required its own well and a 3-million-gallon reservoir, so the baths, pool, kitchens, laundry, and hundreds of rooms could operate like an independent city. The lobby was finished with marble and ornamental tile. Guest rooms were connected to the service corridors by those discreet valet doors, so a traveler could leave shoes or laundry in a compartment without summoning an employee into the room. Even the door lock participated in the performance. Turn the key, and the fan and lights came alive. The hotel promised that old water and new machinery could coexist perfectly. Guests could submit to ultraviolet lamps and mineral baths, then ride upstairs to a ballroom engineered with the confidence of a modern skyscraper. Nothing in downtown Mineral Wells matched its height, and almost nothing matched its appetite for water, electricity, linens, food, or labor. A health resort had produced a machine so large that the town now had to keep attracting crowds simply to feed it. The Baker Hotel held its grand opening gala on November 22, 1929. The stock market had crashed 3 weeks earlier. The most expensive building Mineral Wells had ever produced, $1.2 million, the equivalent of roughly $23 million in today's dollars, opened at the exact moment the American economy was falling apart. It should have been catastrophic. Instead, the baker thrived. Throughout the Depression, while bread lines stretched across the country, wealthy health seekers still came to Mineral Wells. The Mineral Waters clientele did not need to worry about unemployment. The hotel's guest register became a celebrity museum. Clark Gable, Judy Garland, Marlene Dietrich, Will Rogers, the Three Stooges performing for local cattlemen, Jack Dempsey, Lawrence Welk, Helen Keller, and a young Lyndon Johnson all passed through. According to persistent local lore, Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow stayed at the baker and asked staff to remove the hallway carpet outside their door so they could hear approaching footsteps. The story has never been confirmed. Mineral Wells has never stopped telling it. Among the performers passing through the rival Crazy Water Hotel was a young woman from nearby Weatherford named Mary Martin. She had opened a dance studio in Mineral Wells and was given a ballroom to use on one condition. She had to sing in the hotel lobby every Saturday. It was there she learned to use a microphone, to phrase a blues song, to hold a room full of mineral water tourists. She was billed as the Crazy Girl. Martin would go on to originate the roles of Nellie Forbush in South Pacific, Maria von Trapp in The Sound of Music, and the most famous Peter Pan in American theater history. Her son, Larry Hagman, would grow up to play J.R. Ewing on Dallas. Broadway's most beloved leading lady of the mid-20th century learned her craft in a hotel lobby that existed to sell water and crystals. The town could not have invented a stranger launching pad if it tried. At their peak, the two rival hotels held a combined 700 rooms in a town of 6,000 people. The Baker's second-floor spa offered mineral baths, steam rooms, UV light therapy, colonic irrigation, and massage. Treatments ranging from scientifically questionable to outright theatrical, behind private elevators designed so guests never had to be seen in street clothes on the treatment floor. The Cloud Room hosted dances where cattlemen and movie stars looked out over the same prairie where the Lynch family had watered their cattle decades earlier. The town had schools, churches, newspapers, theaters, restaurants, a hospital, a business college, and a downtown built from locally produced Acme brick that gave the commercial blocks a visual consistency suggesting this was all real, all permanent, all built to last. It was not. To understand why people trusted the permanence, picture the town at night. 7 stories of the Crazy Water Hotel glowed at one end of the rivalry. 14 stories of the Baker answered from the other. Music came from 2 rooftop ballrooms. Hotel kitchens ordered meat, produce, ice, and coffee in quantities that supported businesses well beyond the lobby. Bellmen carried trunks from the depot. Bath attendants reset treatment rooms. Musicians, traveling salesmen, doctors, cattle dealers, convention delegates, and families occupied the same elevators. The mineral cure was the official reason for the trip, but the hotels had made the town socially useful. A guest could arrive for rheumatism and stay for a dance, a political meeting, or a business deal. That was the achievement of the boom. It converted an unpleasant glass of water into a complete destination. It was also the hidden weakness. 450 rooms, an Olympic-sized pool, 2 ballrooms, and a bowling alley did not become cheaper when fewer patients believed. The Baker could change its advertisements. It could not shrink its concrete. The water economy was dying even while the Baker thrived. Modern medicine was catching up. Penicillin, sulfa drugs, and antibiotics gave doctors actual cures for the ailments people once traveled to Mineral Wells to treat. The Food and Drug Administration investigated the health claims of mineral water companies and levied a heavy fine against the Crazy Water Crystals operation for fraudulent advertising. The company never fully recovered. By the end of the 1940s, most of Mineral Wells' 21 water companies had closed. The radio show ended. The bathhouses emptied. Trains brought fewer visitors. T.B. Baker himself declared bankruptcy in 1934, 5 years after the grand opening, and passed control of the hotel to his nephew, Earl Baker, who had been managing the property. The building kept running, but the water was no longer the reason. The town had quietly slipped from one economy to another, and most people were too busy to notice. What replaced the water was war. In 1940, Camp Wolters, a small National Guard training site 4 miles east of town since 1925, was massively expanded for World War II. The camp became one of the largest infantry replacement training centers in the United States, with a peak troop capacity of nearly 25,000. The town's population surged from 6,303 to roughly 25,000 in approximately 4 months. The Baker Hotel filled with soldiers' families. Over the course of the war, an estimated 250,000 troops trained at Camp Wolters. Among them, Audie Murphy, who would become the most decorated American combat soldier in the war, and Eddie Slovic, the only American soldier executed for desertion since the Civil War. Both passed through the same dusty camp on the edge of a town originally built to sell drinking water. The Army did not save the water economy, it replaced it, and that replacement was temporary. After the war, the camp was deactivated. Business sagged. Then, in 1951, the facility reopened as a helicopter training base. Renamed Fort Wolters in 1963, it became the Army's primary helicopter center. By the Vietnam era, the base covered over 8,000 acres, with more than 1,000 helicopters stationed across 3 heliports. Approximately 40,000 students from 30 countries completed the 20-week program, about 600 graduates a month at peak capacity. An estimated 95% of all helicopter pilots who flew in Vietnam trained at Fort Wolters. The Baker Hotel, meanwhile, had fully reinvented itself. By the 1950s, it marketed weekend getaways to overworked executives from Dallas and Fort Worth. 80% of its business came from those 2 cities. It hosted the Texas Republican Party conventions in 1952 and 1955, and the Democrats in 1954. The hotel even got the attention of the federal government, which ordered it to stop advertising mineral water as a cure-all. That order was the official end of the founding story. The water was still under the building. The claim was dead. The helicopter years created a sound the earlier resort town could never have imagined. Rotors beat above the same hills that once framed quiet bathhouse advertisements. Trainees practiced takeoffs, navigation, and emergency procedures, while merchants in town learned to depend on Army paychecks. Uniforms replaced bathrobes as the visible proof that rooms and restaurant tables might remain occupied. Yet the base reproduced the old dependency in a harsher form. Mineral wells did not control the medical fashion that had built its first economy, and it did not control the military decisions supporting the second. Every helicopter, instructor, student, and federal dollar had arrived by order. They could leave by order as well. The town had escaped one single industry economy only by entering another. Earl Baker had watched the decline from behind the reception desk for decades. The water tourists were gone. The soldiers came and went with deployments. The conventions were pleasant, but infrequent. By the late 1950s, he had had enough. He made an announcement that became part of Mineral Wells folklore. If no buyer appeared by his 70th birthday, he would close the hotel. No negotiation, no final offers. On April 30th, 1963, true to his word, Earl Baker locked the doors. The building that had opened 3 weeks after the stock market crash, survived the Depression, housed military families during a world war, and pumped mineral water through its pipes for more than 3 decades, was shut down because one exhausted man decided he was finished. 2 years later, in 1965, a group of local investors purchased the Baker Hotel for $375,000, less than a third of its 1929 construction cost. They reopened it, betting that Fort Wolters' Vietnam-era helicopter training would bring enough traffic to keep the lights on. For a few years, it almost worked. The base was active, the town had soldiers, and the rooms had occupants. But the hotel was running on borrowed time. On December 3rd, 1967, Earl Baker was found unconscious on the floor of the Baker Suite, the most prestigious room in the hotel his uncle had built. He had suffered a massive heart attack. He was transported to a Mineral Wells hospital, where he died at age 74. The man who had closed the hotel out of weariness died inside it anyway, on the floor of the room that still carried his family's name. He had tried to walk away from the building. The building did not let him go. The investors kept it open a few more years without conviction. In 1972, the Baker Hotel closed for the last time. No farewell gala in the cloud room. No final toast. The mineral baths gathered dust. The shoeshine stand stayed where it was. The phone booths stayed in their row. The building simply stopped. Then the Army left too. Fort Wolters was officially deactivated on February 1st, 1973, less than a year after the Baker closed. The base that had trained 250,000 infantrymen and 40,000 helicopter pilots, the institution that had been the town's substitute economy for 3 decades, was gone. The population, which had reached roughly 28,000 when military personnel and dependents were counted, dropped to approximately 11,000. Downtown storefronts went dark. Hotels with nothing to sell closed their doors. Restaurants lost their customer base overnight. The gap-toothed commercial district that visitors see today, abandoned brick and stone buildings interrupting stretches of empty sidewalk, is what that decade left behind. Mineral Wells had lost 3 economies in sequence: mineral water, grand hotels, and the military. Each loss alone might have been survivable. Together, they were devastating. The Baker Hotel's 14-story shadow fell across streets that no longer had enough people to walk them. For years, the town held on through ranching, agriculture, oil, and institutional stubbornness. Fort Wolters was carved up. 90 acres became a Weatherford College education center. A portion became Lake Mineral Wells State Park, a 3,082-acre recreation area with a 20-mile converted rail trail and the rock climbing walls at Penitentiary Hollow. The military base became a place to hike. Empty barracks became storage units and summer camps. But one thread never broke. The famous Mineral Water Company, the business Ed Dismuke founded after his no-hope diagnosis, kept pouring. Through 2 world wars, the Depression, the FDA crackdowns, and the population crash, the pavilion on Northwest 6th Street stayed open. You can walk in today, sit at the bar, and order a glass of the same water that built and broke the town. Dismuke's operation outlasted all 20 of its competitors. It is the last one standing. The Crazy Water Hotel followed a quieter path. After decades as a retirement home and years of sitting vacant, the building was restored and reopened in the fall of 2022 as Crazy Water Plaza, a boutique hotel that retains its vintage Spanish colonial revival character. The original Crazy Well still exists inside the building. Guests can drink from it. The famous water company also restored the old Crazy bottling plant and opened a Crazy bathhouse and spa, where visitors can soak in the same water that once drew 150,000 people a year. The Texas legislature officially designated Mineral Wells the wellness capital of Texas. The brand outlasted the medicine. The Baker Hotel's afterlife has been harder. Multiple restoration attempts have failed since 1972. The building was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1982, which preserved its legal status but did not fill its rooms. In 2014, nearly 96% of local voters approved redirecting 1/8 of the city's sales tax toward the project, authorizing as much as $4 million for a building many residents had never seen operating. In 2019, investors Laird Fairchild and Chad Patton, later joined by major financial partner Brent Ryan, launched a $65 million renovation plan. The original 450 rooms would become roughly 165 larger suites. The second-floor spa would return. The cloud room would host events again. Asbestos was removed, corridors stabilized, elevator shafts cleared, and original exterior lamps salvaged. Then rising costs and a financing gap slowed the work. By November 2025, the developer said a senior loan backed by a federal rural development guarantee had been arranged through Clear Fork Bank, with roughly 3 years of construction expected after the remaining contracts were completed. The announced target moved to spring 2028. In May 2026, a downtown fundraiser offering a rare look inside sold its first 250 seats in 3 hours, then sold another 100. Mineral Wells was still buying admission to a future it had been promised for decades. But while the town was planning a reopening, the land delivered 2 disasters that made the old hotel's survival feel less like a metaphor and more like a test. At about 5 in the afternoon on April 28, 2026, a tornado touched down north of Mineral Wells near FM 1821 and Sundown Road. It moved southeast into Country Club Estates, crossed residential streets, struck the Holiday Hills area, and continued toward the old Fort Wolters property. The National Weather Service rated it EF3, with estimated winds of 145 miles per hour. One roof was torn from a house and carried roughly 200 feet. Trees were uprooted, power poles snapped, shipping containers overturned. Industrial buildings that had replaced parts of the military economy folded under the wind. 5 people went to the hospital, but no one was killed. That absence became the first fact officials repeated, because the physical evidence suggested a death toll should have existed. Fire Chief Ryan Dunn described arriving to roofs missing and buildings collapsing. Christopher Hester and his wife grabbed their dog and sheltered in a hallway after wind burst through their duplex and began pulling the structure apart. Afterward, their belongings were scattered into the storm path. Ventimatic, a local manufacturer of fans and ventilation equipment, evacuated its employees before the tornado and then shut down because its plant had suffered severe damage. When the city and state completed their early count, at least 80 homes and nearly 60 commercial properties had been affected. 9 homes and 14 commercial buildings were listed as destroyed. A curfew kept people away from unstable structures and downed lines. The Baker Hotel remained standing outside the worst damage. The old tower survived while newer homes, workshops, and factories northeast of it were open to the sky. 4 months later, the threat came from the ground instead of the clouds. On the afternoon of August 24th, a grass fire started near U.S. Highway 180 and Ross Watson Road, only a few miles southwest of Palo Pinto. Heat, drought, dry vegetation, and shifting wind turned it into the Ross Fire. It moved north toward Jack County, crossed ranch land, jumped the Brazos River, and threw smoke over the same hills seen from the Baker's cloud room. Firefighters cut lines with bulldozers while aircraft dropped retardant and scooped water. Ranchers moved cattle ahead of the flames. Some animals could not be saved. Roads closed. Grafford schools canceled classes. Evacuation warnings spread through rural communities where a change in wind could erase the distance between a visible smoke column and a front yard. The fire reached Worth Ranch, an 800-acre scout camp along the Brazos that had operated for generations. No scouts were there, and the camp ranger escaped. But the Longhorn Council reported catastrophic damage to many buildings. The place had taught children to camp in the Palo Pinto landscape. Now that landscape burned through the camp itself. At least 5 structures elsewhere were reported destroyed. More were damaged. And federal officials approved assistance covering most eligible firefighting costs. Nearly 200 firefighters worked across Palo Pinto and Jack counties as local water supplies, livestock shelters, road access, and heavy smoke became part of the emergency. Near Grayford, the flames also reached Rochelle's Canoe Rental, a family business that had put people on the Brazos since 1969. Sheds, boats, and equipment were destroyed. A Mineral Wells firefighter saved the family's house, separating a total business loss from a total personal one by the width of a fire line. At nearby Lake Godstone, volunteer firefighters used jugs and buckets to wet hot spots after most vegetation across the 188-acre retreat burned. These were not famous landmarks like the Baker. They were working pieces of the local outdoor economy, the businesses that replaced parts of what Mineral Wells had lost, and they were suddenly depending on strangers carrying water by hand. As of August 28, 2026, the Ross Fire had burned about 85,000 acres and was reported at roughly 26% containment. Those numbers were still changing as crews worked, so there was no clean ending to describe. Mineral Wells itself had not been consumed, but the county surrounding it had been transformed within days. In April, a tornado crossed the former military edge of town. In August, wildfire crossed the river and ranch country beyond it. The two disasters exposed a newer version of the same vulnerability that had shaped Mineral Wells since James Lynch stopped in the valley. A community can market the land, build on it, bottle what lies beneath it, and depend on what the government places upon it, but it never controls the conditions around it. The Baker survived both events. Survival, however, is not the same as escape. The ghost tours have already started. The Baker Hotel Ghost Walk draws visitors to the lobby where Judy Garland once posed beside the reception desk, where the phone booths still stand in a row like relics from a world that believed in calling your bookie from a wooden box. The Travel Channel's Ghost Adventures filmed an investigation there in 2012. Mineral Wells' most active tourism product is now performing its own haunting. People pay to walk through a building that was built to make them healthy and has instead become famous for its dead. And here is the detail the ghost hunters never mention. The water in Mineral Wells actually contains naturally occurring lithium, not in therapeutic concentrations, but present. Lithium is the same element prescribed today as a standard psychiatric medication for bipolar disorder and mood conditions. The founding legend of the town, the unnamed woman who sat beside a well and drank until her mental state improved, was mocked by children, monetized by businessmen, broadcast on national radio, investigated by the FDA, debunked by modern medicine, and finally abandoned by the economy it created. But the lithium in the water means the story may have contained a sliver of accidental truth. The crazy woman may have been self-medicating with the one compound in that well that actually works on the human brain. No one recorded her name. No one followed up. She disappeared from the record entirely. But the well she drank from is still there, inside the Crazy Water Hotel. And the water still comes up the same way it did in 1885, mineral-heavy, faintly bitter, and strange enough to make you wonder. The Baker Hotel still stands at 180 feet, still rising over a downtown that never grew tall enough to meet it. Wyatt Hedricks poured in-place concrete, chosen because no one in Mineral Wells knew how to erect structural steel, has held the building upright through more than half a century of vacancy, neglect, storms, and vandalism. The shoeshine stand is still in the lobby. The phone booths are still on the wall. The cloud room is still up there, facing the same Palo Pinto hills that James Lynch saw when he dug his first well in 1877. The water did not cure everything, but it was never nothing either, and the building is still waiting.